we've talked about the information landscape before, and I think it feels quite necessary to talk about this now because, I mean, we've put out a few films recently about vaccines, ivermectin. Obviously, a lot of this is a little bit close to home because of the focus on Brett's podcast at the moment. But I think it flags up a lot of more interesting topics and deeper topics. And one that I'm particularly concerned about personally, I've interviewed you before. We put out a film, Glitch in the Matrix 2, about your philosophy. We've talked to Brett quite a lot. And I really value your analysis of culture and analysis of the information landscape. But I'm also concerned from something that I see particularly with Rebel Wisdom and with the comments thread and this sort of sense that in this wider heterodox space, there are people who are attracted to a lot of the arguments because they are first principles thinkers. They're looking at things from kind of a heterodox perspective. But I also see a kind of reactive contrarianism as well, which for me is just falling over onto the other side of this divide. We can talk about the perverse incentives on the mainstream, but for me, there's a lot of perverse incentives on the other side as well. So I'd be interested in your take on that and whether you share some of those same concerns.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think I very often call it reflexive contrarianism, where the idea is that a bad contrarian attempts to put a minus sign in front of whatever it was that was said by the mainstream and hopes that that's right because the mainstream is always wrong. That doesn't work for, myriad reasons, but in particular, one thing is it means you're under the control of the mainstream because you're reflexively simply negating them at all times. And very often the most actually heterodox and difficult thing for somebody who's in that space is to say, I actually think that the mainstream is correct about something. They may have gotten there through means that I don't approve of, but I think that first principles thinking is very tough. And one of the reasons I think we often claim that we want people to be critical thinkers, but then in practice that's honored in the breach, is that very few people have the discipline. And that's why we've talked, I think, previously about camping and decamping and about maintaining the dialectic within the self. And in practice, this appears to be more than most people can handle. And so I think that one of the reasons you're looking to heterodox thinkers as a population is that you're hoping to find somebody who doesn't lose their footing. And that's very tough. Almost everyone loses his or her footing at some point on these topics. And it's one of the pressures on the heterodox thinker are unbelievable. If you're going to be in public and you're going to try to get it right, and you're going to try to maintain friendships, not stab people in the back, also try to be critical, but very often, sometimes you don't, I think one of the great dangers on our side of the fence is that we want to show that we are the actually public-spirited people. When we have private interests, we have loyalties, we have things that we prefer not to say that we think we should be allowed not to say. It's one of the reasons, if you look at my feed, you'll find the word institutional is used probably more than by anyone else on Twitter. And the reason for that is I think that the ethics of individuals taking on institutions are very sweet. The institution is not going to get harmed. The institution may be diminished. It may have, fewer benefactors, let's say, but an institution isn't going to take its own life. It's not going to, have an alcoholism problem. I think that individual on individual or institution against individual these are much more fraught. Now, I think one of the problems is some of these accounts have gotten quite large. And the question is, are they under any form of control at all? Are there any pressures? When we hear, don't platform that person, many of us have a reflexive feeling of, I'll platform whoever the hell I want. I don't even think platform is a verb. What is doing the gatekeeping? What is doing the quality control? And David, I want to just sing your praises slightly. You and Barry Weiss were two of the earliest people who were really looking at this question about are the heterodox taking up the full suite of responsibilities for the system that they seek to critique and displace. And one of those things is, well, once you get enough power, are you using it responsibly? And I think you've been on that from the beginning. I've recognized it, but I think that coming from the world of broadcast journalism, you were quite early to realize how important that was as we see these accounts get large.
Yeah, and I guess the interesting thing from my perspective is what I've described as the uncanny valley between the mainstream and the alternative. The mainstream, we see the incentive structures there, and often I'd say it's an existential project to be able to weed out the heterodox good ideas where the novelty is and from the incorrect. Like, that's an existential project, and we don't trust the big tech platforms to do it. My concern is that I think we've been very critical of the incentive structures, the perverse incentives on the mainstream side, whereas it seems clear to me that there's a lot of perverse incentives on the other side. We can talk about audience capture, we can talk about the way that these platforms kind of warp the world around us and stop us kind of being able to see or exploit our own biases. And this sort of feels like, and I get increasingly concerned that do you think that that you might have had too much of a focus only on the faults of the mainstream and not enough of the faults of the alternative?
Appreciate that. Just as I've sung your praises about being early, give me at least that I may have introduced the concept of audience capture, because I've been worrying about the same thing from the beginning. I think I've counseled many people that you have to put poisonous tweets for the people who follow you, who you wish would not follow you. You have to make sure, in some sense, that they understand that you're not there to flatter them. I mean, you'll notice, for example, David, that I have been trying to avoid any kind of a Patreon at enormous costs to myself. Do you have a Patreon-like thing where people can contribute to you?
Yes, we've got a membership model.
I don't. In fact, I read ads. I've read ads from the beginning. I've just noticed, for example, that my brother and Heather have started reading ads. And my point has been, I would rather be dependent on carefully cultivated commercial relationships than have a bunch of my audience, because your audience will always say things like, "That's it, I'm unfollowing you, you've gone over the line," including where they misinterpret you. And it's important to have a certain amount of antagonism at a healthy level, not at a psychotic level, with one's own audience. I think that I frequently say it on air, which is I expect my audience to work their ass off. And I'm not going to pre-chew everything. Why? Because I don't want the audience that needs everything pre-chewed. I don't want the audience that says, "Oh, well, Eric said it, so we can stop thinking." And it's one of the reasons why I think I've got a very, very large audience, but it's not millions. Well, maybe it is millions on something like Clubhouse, but again, there's an active attempt to discourage the people who will capture you. And almost everyone who has numbers, because I will move to a sponsorship model where people can contribute, but I'm sad about it. I'm being forced to do it for reasons that I don't want to get into. But I've tried for the longest. I mean, I've taken my own podcast off the air at times because I don't want to be removed by the tech companies. I don't want to be enmeshed in certain battles. You'll notice that I almost always wear a jacket because I am the establishment in waiting, not the sort of rebels living in the trees, enjoying terrorism, calling it freedom fighting. Yeah, it requires an incredible amount of discipline to do this. And most of us, myself included, aren't equal to it all the time. So audience capture has been a huge concern, but give me my due that I've been worried about how do we take on the responsibilities of the thing that we're replacing. You're really asking a good question, in my opinion. What is it that the heterodox have to do to avoid the same sorts of problems that corrupt the mainstream? Once these things become viable businesses, how do you avoid being captured by your own incentive structure? You make money from this. One of the reasons you are having me on is that you know that this will generate interest and you will make money from this. True?
One of the reasons, I guess.
Just admit to it. Okay. One of the reasons I'm on is that I want to make sure that I have a trusted person I can talk to so that I've been incredibly silent on this ivermectin thing. I'm trusting you because I know you. And I'm not happy about the way this ivermectin thing is playing out. But do we need Brett Weinstein in the world? Hell yes, we need Brett Weinstein in the world. Am I worried about the incentives on Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, Ben Shapiro, myself, you, Barry Weiss? Absolutely. Now, my personal stupidity is that I've lost a tremendous amount of income trying to avoid certain problems so that I can continue to be a voice. And you can say this selfishly, which is that I'd like to invest in my long-term credibility by getting things right. I know that if I watched a 20% hit in my bottom line, it would affect me. So sometimes I take that to zero so I can't be hit, so I can continue to do sense making. Do I think that's a good state of affairs? No, it's lousy. I question myself every day. Am I an idiot for having given up this much income, not even putting my hat out? I don't know. I don't know how to do it. But I do know that the following thing is that we are in an existential dance, and that those of us who need to be in leadership positions have to show some amount of ability to forego wealth. I mean, I think we need wealth. I personally think that the best thing for me would be fuck you money. I would like to be immunized from the market through fuck you money rather than immunized from the market through stoicism. However, we all have to figure this out for ourselves.